Thanks, Jenny. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight to talk about something that I'm very passionate about, and that's helping parents support their children when they're just learning to read in those first few years and even just prior to getting to school. Jenny mentioned that I'm a speech pathologist. So I've worked for over 25 years working with young children and school-age children. And after that period of time, the opportunity came up to combine two loves. I'd always wanted to work within libraries as well. And so about 2.5 years ago, I started working in libraries as a library officer. And what it's meant for me is that I could combine my knowledge and skills that I've developed as a speech pathologist to help parents and caregivers support their children in learning to read. I tend to hover a lot around the reading resource materials in libraries and love supporting parents who come in and quite often just don't know where to start. You know, they've come in to borrow some readers, or the teacher said, go and find some things at the library that you can read at home. And it can be really hard knowing, what do I choose when you're faced with a whole shelf full of readers and other resources. What I'm expecting is that the people I have in the audience tonight will either be parents or grandparents who may be raising children, or guardians of children, because the talk, we are going to focus very heavily on the children that are in that 5 to 7-year-old category. So it may include 5-year-olds who are actually in kindergarten or that year prior to going to school, but most especially children that are in sort of foundation, or what used to be called prep, grade 1 and grade 2. And as I mentioned, children who are starting school next year, some of the information we'll be talking about tonight will actually be important for you if you'd like to help your child get ready for learning to read at school. So the idea is that I can't tell you everything there is possibly to know about helping your child to read. I don't know anyone that knows everything, but what I do hope is that you'll come away from tonight feeling like you've got a little bit more support, understanding even just a little bit more about reading, how children learn to read, what things you can do to help them, and how you can choose materials, particularly at Brimbank Libraries, to help you do that with your child. Oh, just excuse me for a moment. There we go. So basically in the webinar, I'm going to share some early information about early reading. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the resources that are available at Brimbank Libraries. And we're also going to have some time for questions. Anytime I've put up on the slide a word that I think could possibly be unfamiliar for some people, you'll often find in brackets I've put what I mean by that. Because I'm aware that there'll be a vast range of people watching the webinar tonight, including people for whom English may not be their first language or their family language. So hopefully I can cover any things that might seem to be words that you may not be familiar with. Okay, so question to ask, and I guess you've probably already asked this question because you've joined the webinar, but why do I need to help my child learn to read? Isn't that what school does? And there's a few really important reasons as to why you do need to support your child with their reading. Firstly, because it is expected that it is a shared role between school and home. If you can imagine a busy classroom with a large number of children, children don't always get that one-to-one attention that they sometimes need to help them really consolidate those early reading skills that they're developing. Also, learning a new skill, whether it be reading, learning to drive a car, learning to swim or play tennis, any new skill that you're developing, it takes practice. And if you're learning something for the first time, you usually need help from someone that can already do it and help you and show you what to do. The other reason is because children spend, yes, a lot of time at school, but they also spend lots of time with their family at home, on the weekends, and children can learn from everyday opportunities. Learning to read isn't just about bringing home a reader and reading it from school. And we'll talk a little bit about those things. Okay. A really important concept I would like parents to understand, and caregivers: do we learn to read the same way we learn to talk? The answer is actually no. And there's a few really specific things I'd like to hone in on here. Talking occurs naturally. It's innate, or what we mean inborn. So no matter what country we're born into, we will learn to talk, and we'll learn to talk in that language, or the language that people use when they're speaking with us. Reading is a different situation altogether. It doesn't occur naturally. Whilst it's really good to expose your children to lots of lovely picture storybooks and read with them and talk to them about the pictures and what they think might happen in the story and who's in the story and what they like about it, those sorts of conversations are really important to enrich your child's language development. But reading won't just happen because a child gets read to frequently. It helps with vocabulary development, it helps with knowledge, but reading words and being able to understand text or written words, it actually needs to be taught. And it's quite a complex thing that needs to be taught. Anyone who's perhaps learned English after having their family language will probably be able to tell you how difficult it can be to learn to read English, because it's not necessarily what we call phonetic, where when you see each letter, the word reads as it sounds out. It can be a very difficult language to learn to read. Something to keep in mind too is that children will progress at different rates. You will have some children who just seem to learn to read quite easily, and maybe don't need lots of special attention to read. They're pretty much going to be good readers in whatever environment perhaps they're in for their learning. You'll find a lot of other children though will progress in the average expected way, provided they are getting correct instruction and practice in reading. But you'll also find that there will be children in these early years of learning to read that will struggle with reading. So it's really important that children are getting support from school and support from yourself to really help establish those reading skills in those first 3 years. They often talk about that when you start reading in those first few years, you're learning to read. It's often said though, by the time you get to grade 3, you're reading to learn. And you really want to have strong reading skills before you hit sort of grade 3. There are also different methods of teaching and different philosophies about how teaching of reading should be undertaken. Basically, one of the most important things to keep in mind is that any reading instruction technique should be evidence-based. And by that, we mean that there should be studies and research done that proves it is an effective method to teach children to read, and not just that top tier of 5 to 10% of children perhaps that will learn to read no matter what. It's important that any reading instruction is in a manner that will teach all children to be able to read. So different schools will be teaching reading in different ways. Some will be using more advanced techniques, some will be relying on techniques they've used in the past, and some will be doing a mixture of both. It certainly doesn't hurt to have a chat with your school teacher or with the school about what method they use to teach reading at the school, so that that will help you to know how to actually help your child at home. Okay. Oh, I just need to go back one. Just bear with me. There we go. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about sound awareness and reading words. Oh, hold on. Here we go. Okay. Now, sound awareness is an important skill that children prior to going to school should learn about. But also, even once you've gone to school, there are a lot of young beginner readers that are still struggling with this concept. So a really important thing that I would like to be able to distinguish with you tonight is that children need to understand the difference between letters and sounds. And as such, it's also important for those that are supporting children to learn to read to understand the importance of this too. A letter is something that you write. A sound is something that you say, and words can be broken down into separate sounds. What I often see is a real emphasis, especially for children before they start school, on knowing the alphabet. You know, do you know the whole alphabet? And if you see a letter written, do you know what letter it is? Well, I'm going to speak a little bit about something that's a little bit more important than that. Okay. I want you to have a look at just a little example I've put there. When you read the word mat, you've got the letter M, which makes an M sound, the letter A, and in this situation, it makes an A sound, and the letter T, which makes the T sound. And if you push them together, what we call blending, you get the word mat. It has 3 sounds in it. I want to give you an example of the word cat, which is a little bit different. You've got the letter C, but it makes a K sound in this word. The letter A still makes an A, and the letter T still makes a T. And you push those sounds together, you blend them together, and you get the word cat. Can you see, though, the letter C in this word makes a K sound? But sometimes the letter C makes a S sound, like if you were saying circle. So it just goes back a little bit to what I was saying before about there being lots of complex rules that children need to learn as they develop their reading. I'd like you to just have a little think for the moment and think about which you think might be more important when you're first learning to read. I've probably given you a little bit of a hint already, I hope. Okay. Is it knowing the sound the letter makes or knowing the name of the letter? Okay. Basically, knowing the sound the letter makes when you're first learning to read, it doesn't matter how many letters of the alphabet you can name. If you don't actually know what sound they make, you won't be able to read the word in front of you. So I'm going to talk about some little things that you can do every day at home and just when you're going about your everyday business, helping your child become more aware of sounds. You'll find that quite a lot of people will say, you really doesn't matter if you haven't got the names of all the alphabet letters when you get to school. It's more important to know what sound that letter represents. Okay, so some ways that you can help your child develop sound awareness can be done just doing everyday things. This is before you've even thought about going to the library to borrow a reader. So you can help your child by, when you're sharing books together, seeing if you can find things in the pictures that might start with the same sound. If you're spending time at home, find little things around the house that start with the same sound. So you might have a banana and then go for a walk around and see if you can find some more things that start with that first sound in banana. So the B sound, you know, and you might walk around and find a ball. I'm sure there'll be a book somewhere, and just have a little discussion, a little bit of fun about the fact that, hey, all those things sound like they start with the same sound. But if you find something that doesn't start with the sound, again, do a little bit of detective work together. And if it was a sock, you can discuss with your child whether you think that starts with the same sound as the banana. So banana, ball, book, sock. And just discuss the fact that the sound at the start of the word sock doesn't sound like the B sound at the start of the other objects that you may have found. If you're just going for a walk or going to the playground, you'll pass signs as you go along towards where you're walking to. They might be street signs, they may be signs on the road, they may be shop signs, and you can talk about sounds and letters too when you're just walking around. So you might come to a stop sign, and just talk about the first sound that seems to be at the top of that word. So when you see the letter, say, oh, do you know what sound that letter makes on that special sign? And you can talk about it starts with a S, and look out maybe when on that particular day, look out for other words on street signs and other signs that might start with that S. Next time you go out, choose another sound you're going to look for and talk about that on the way. The supermarket can be a fun one if you're not too frazzled. Is maybe finding things that start with the same letter. So again, I mentioned bananas. If you put some bananas in your trolley, when you're going around the fruit aisles, see what other things you can find that start with B. So it might be broccoli or beans. Just find little ways in everyday things just to bring it into your conversation in just a casual way by finding things that start with the same sound. Okay. Brimbank Library has bought some new resources recently, and one of the ones I'd like to talk to you about is what's called Milo's Birthday Surprise. It's a book by Maureen Pollard, who's with the Little Learners Love Literacy organisation. Now, if you have a look at the picture, this is actually the picture on the second page, because I want to show you something a bit different on the first. The idea is that Milo is having a birthday party and he's inviting all his friends. Each of his friends, their names start with a different sound, and they only like things that start with that sound. So this is a page you can share with your child. And Milo obviously likes things that start with because his name is Milo and he's a monkey. So you can take turns to look at the picture and see what things you can find that start with Sometimes taking turns is a good idea because it takes the pressure off your child to have to come up with every single answer. So you might notice that there's milk, and they might see a moon, and you might mention the mouse, and just chat about the fact they all start with the sound. On the other side of the page, there are other things that start with Now, this is a great teaching opportunity, is that when your child looks at this page, they may say, when they see what looks to be a cup hanging in the tree, cup, which gives you the chance to talk about what it might be called if it started with an sound, because Milo only likes things that start with So what's another thing that's like a cup that we drink out of that starts with You can give them a little hint if they're not sure and maybe start with ma, and they might guess it's mug. The same with the phone. I've had lots of 5- and 6-year-olds say to me when they see this picture, oh, phone. And then we discuss, does phone start with a or does it start with a f? And we decide and problem solve like little detectives as to what sound it might start with. Sometimes they might need a hint. Mum has one in her handbag, and it's called a mo, and often they're able to guess the rest with mobile. So it doesn't matter if they guess the wrong object name, it's a chance for learning. And having mistakes in learning is what learning is all about. Don't ever feel like it's a problem because it was an error that they made. It's what you do with the error that helps make it into a learning opportunity. Okay. Now, there's some lovely readers in Brimbank Libraries, and this is a picture out of one that's called Pat It by Becky Blake, which is a series of readers under the Collins Big Cat Phonics for Letters and Sounds. This is the very end of the reader, but it's fabulous. Nearly all the early readers that they have a different page at the end where you can see the glass that looks a little bit like a magnifying glass, and it's asking us to look for all the things that start with S. If you're having a look now, I hope you're seeing things like skipping and sliding and swinging and stepping and sitting, and it just gives children lots of opportunity to practice thinking about what sounds are making those names in the picture. There's another one here that's on the other side of the page. You can see things like sand and spades and stars and sandcastles. There's probably even a few more. I think I've missed the squirrel in the tree. And yeah, but lots of opportunities for talking about things that start with S. And again, if they pick something that doesn't start with S and they say boy, again, rather than see that as a mistake, use it to chat about the fact that, does boy start with S? Or do you think it might start with B? And just again, use that as a learning opportunity. Another useful thing to bring to your child's attention is to think about the aspect of rhyme. And that's usually words that sound the same at the end. So you'd be very familiar, I'm sure, with things like cat sounds like bat, sounds like hat. If you were thinking a bit further, you might think of mat and rat and all sorts of other words. Something that can be a little bit tricky about reading English is that rhyme isn't always spelt the same way. If you have a listen to words like sky and high and by and my, they're actually all spelt differently, but they actually rhyme. No wonder it takes a long time to develop all of our reading skills. Now, ways to help your children become aware of rhyme is just drawing their attention to words that sound the same that you notice in things like singing songs together. So if you were sharing the song like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, you've got twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. So you'll be talking about the fact that star sounds like far and ah. You might even need to give your children a hint, because when they first start learning about rhyme, it's completely foreign to a lot of children. So you might need to say, let's try and think of something else that might rhyme with star and far and ah. It's something that I drive and daddy drives. It's a, and often they'll jump in with car, or you might have to help them a little bit. Also too, again, sharing books. If you're borrowing picture storybooks from the library, you'll find that there are an enormous number of children's picture storybooks that actually have rhyme within them. And that can be, again, a great way to just incidentally talk about rhyme. Enjoy the story. Don't turn it all into a lesson about learning to read, because it's so valuable that children learn to love stories and have fun looking at the pictures and about the things that happen. But it's just nice here and there to just use it as a little bit of a teaching exercise to help them learn some things that will be useful to them when they're reading. Okay. Now, I'd like to give you a little bit of help in what to do when you're in the library and you see a shelf full of beginner reader books, because it can be quite overwhelming, I think, for families. I work in 2 different municipalities, and it doesn't matter which one I'm in. When parents see that wall of readers, it's really hard sometimes knowing where do you start. Now, Brimbank Libraries have a nice little hint for you. They have all of their readers colour-coded, so that green being level 1 is the easiest level, going right through to lavender at level 5, which is the hardest level. Now, something that's probably important to know though, is that are the books at each level exactly the same? And the answer is no. You'll find that lots of the readers might be published by different publishers. So some might be produced in Australia, some might be in England, Canadian, But they'll all have English text in them, so the words will be in English, but they may be published in different countries. There are also lots of different series of readers where they will start with a particular sort of series, and we'll talk about that in a little while, and you can follow that series through each level of those different coloured levels. There's also a mixture of fiction and non-fiction. And if you're readers yourself, you'll be familiar with the fact that fiction is stories that are made up and created, whereas non-fiction are the books that are factual books. Some children prefer reading factual books, some children prefer stories that are made up, and some like a mixture of both. And one of the most important things to be aware of is that there's a range of readers, and the readers follow different approaches on learning to read. So we're going to talk a little bit now about some of the different approaches that you might come across when you're selecting a reader. Okay, so I've just chosen two types mainly because these are two of the most predominant types of readers you'll find when you go into a library. We have decodable books where most of the words can be sounded out. They'll have short words in them, and they will limit the number of sounds that are used in that book. So it might be there's only 2 vowel sounds that will appear in that book. It might be a and maybe I. And there might only be 6 consonant sounds, which might be p and t and k and h and b. It will be limited in what the children are seeing in that story. The pictures are usually not meant to help the children guess what the written word says. They actually have to read the words and not just look at a picture to guess what it says. And they literally can't rely on looking at the pictures. So you'll see I've put at the bottom, sit in it and step on it, pat. I'm just going to show you what I mean by decodable, meaning you can break the code. You can break the words down into separate bits and push them together again to work out what the word is. So when a child sees the word sit, if they know what sound goes with that letter, even if they don't know the letter name, they will say s, it, push it together, sit. In, it, push them together and you get in, it, push them together, which is what we call blending, and you get the word it. So they are literally going through the words and like cracking a little code, they're sounding each sound out in that word, then pushing them together to be able to read the word. Now, some of you might be familiar too with predictable textbooks. And in these books, there are many words that usually can't be sounded out. They may have longer words. They may also have a situation where the number of sounds is not limited. So there could be any number of different, what we call consonant sounds and different vowel sounds. You might remember back in your schooling, the vowels were A, E, I, O, U, and all the other letters of the alphabet make different consonant sounds. The sentences in predictable books are usually repetitive, so that you find the same sentence on each page or the same couple of sentences, but maybe 1 or 2 words change in that sentence. And basically the pictures are usually designed in those books to help children to guess the words. So the examples I've put there is the girl is laughing, the girl is climbing. Now a book would often go through and have maybe 4, 5 or 6 more sentences starting with the girl is something ing. Now you can see that the word laughing and climbing would be a very difficult word to read when you're first starting out to read. If we sounded that word out, it doesn't make the word laughing. I'll try it. All a, g, h, I, n, g. You get la, ha, g, hi, ing. So the strategies of decoding words are not always applicable to words with predictable texts. Children will often get help with the first sentence and then seem to be reading the next few pages and getting the final word right because they're looking at the picture, which sometimes helps the children to feel that they're reading the words. A difficulty to be, though, later on, if you were to write down those words for your child, in most cases, children can't necessarily then read the word laughing, even though they saw it in the book. Anyway, let's go on and talk a little bit more about that. Okay. I've got a picture here from a reader, the one I mentioned a bit earlier, by Becky Blake, Collins Big Cat Phonics, Letters and Sounds. And the book is called Pat It. And this is an example that's just taken off the shelf in the library at Brimbank. You can see it's a very early reader. There's only 2 words on the page. Both words can be decoded by sounding them out. So just as we've spoken about a little bit before, if your child sees the word, and if they know that when they see the letter T, it makes a T sound, even if they don't know the name of it is the letter T, if they see that and know it says T, and they see the little A and know that the sound that goes with that is A, and they see the letter P and they know that the sound that goes with that letter when they see it written is P, they can go T, A, P, push it together to blend it and get the word tap. Same thing with the next word, it. If they know to identify each sound, it, and push them together, and it makes the word it. So you find that in the decodable books, except for a few words, which they will list and let you know, all of the words in the book should be able to be sounded out. I'm going to give you 2 words that are a little bit jargonish, and I know I said I would try and avoid using too many terms that can be unfamiliar, but you might come across these when you look further and look at anything online and be reading about reading. So segmenting is a fancy way of saying breaking up the word into separate sounds, just like we've been talking about. T, a, p. Fancy name for that is segmenting. Blending is actually being able to join the sounds back together to make a word. So tap. If you've got the sound t, a, p, can you push them together and blend them to be able to then say the word? Okay. I've put down some examples of beginner reader book series that are available at Brimbank Libraries. So I won't run through them all there. There are a mixture of, oh, sorry, I'll bring that back up again. Oh, sorry about that. Just give you a moment. No, it's not wanting to go back. I can tell you what it said. So there's a mixture of decodable books and non-decodable books. A lot of research at the moment says beginner readers are best to start with decodable books, and there's a role for non-decodable books as they get a little bit older. If you're having any trouble working out what non-decodable book words are, they're basically words that you can't sound out in order to read the word. So I've put a few examples there. If we take the word, say, for the, it's a word that if you broke it down into its separate sounds and then pushed it back together, you wouldn't get the word the. You'd get t, e, to hair. So there are some words when you're reading English, that cannot be decoded. Children need to just learn that when they see that word, it is the word the. Something later on, as they pursue reading through those early years, they will start to learn complex rules about reading. So they'll learn that when you see a TH together, it will often say a th sound or a th sound. If you were saying the word thin, T-H-I-N, it's not to-hin, it's thin. But those sorts of rules start to be learned a little bit later than when you're just starting out as a beginner reader. One other example I'll give you there is, say, the word no. Children often first start learning about the vowel sounds. They learn the very short sound. So they learn that when they see a letter O, the sound is O. Now, if we kind of break up that word, we get O, not. So it doesn't become the word no. So again, as they progress through their reading, they learn more rules about reading. Is that the letter O can say O, like in hot, but then they also learn that the letter O can say O, as in no. There's lots of rules, but they don't have to learn them all in that first 2 years. Okay. Just want to mention, if you're borrowing some books from the library, some beginner reader books, they will often refer to the non-decodable words, the words that you can't sound out, by different names or descriptions. That could be a little bit confusing. Some of them will call them challenging words. Some will call them common exception words. Some of them will call them heart words because you need to learn them off by heart. And some of them will call them sight words, meaning you need to be able to see them and just know what they are. Often there's information on the front, back of the cover, and also in the very last page or the inside of the back cover, which will give you a little bit of a hint about what words in the story are likely to be difficult, especially if it's a decodable reader. It will list what words are perhaps not decodable. Okay, I'm hoping, Jenny, that we've saved enough time for questions. I think we've got about 20 minutes, if I'm right. Have we had any questions come through in the chat?
No questions yet, but we'll open it up for questions. So if anybody does have any question, if you'd like to put it in the Q&A field, and then Leanne will be able to answer your question. And maybe I'll put a question to any of the audience. If anyone wants to just advise us or tell us, perhaps, is your child bringing home a reader from school regularly? And I don't know, even if you know the name of the series, and then, you know, Leanne, if she's familiar with that series, may be able to comment possibly. But we'll open it up. But thank you very much for Leanne for all those points that you've raised. I certainly found them really practical information. Let me just make myself visible so I'm not talking from a void here. Okay. I think I've...
Perhaps while we're just waiting on a question, Jenny, there is something I would like to mention when you are selecting readers or, you know, learning resources from a library. And by this, I'm not meaning the picture story books that you're reading for fun and enjoyment and developing their language and their knowledge about the world. Is if you are selecting readers for your child, and I find this is something that comes up a lot when I'm speaking to parents, try to choose some readers that are way too easy for your child. Borrow a couple that you know are just so easy, they won't challenge them. Then borrow some that you know are probably at the level that they're at, but they need a little bit of help. They might read a couple of the words and then need a little bit of help, read a few more, need a little bit of help. And then you may actually borrow one or two that you know will be a lot more challenging. It's better to have a couple of readers that you've taken home with you. You don't want them all to be challenged, because if you ever tried to learn a new skill, you'll know how hard it is at the start, and it's easy to become frustrated. And it's like that for children when they're learning to read. If every time they're trying to read a reader, it seems too hard, it can really impact their confidence and their self-esteem and their wanting to read. As parents and caregivers, sometimes it's very easy to say, oh, but that one's too easy for him. He already knows that one. It's still good to keep up their confidence. So sometimes I suggest, if you've borrowed a few readers, you can say, okay, well, let's read two. You choose one and I'll choose one. They'll inevitably, most of the time, choose the one that is easiest because they know they can read it. And you might choose one that you know they're starting to cope with that level of reading, but might just need a little bit of help. So yeah, try and balance what you borrow. And there's such a large selection that there's always usually enough that you can borrow a couple from across, you know, easy to, at their level, to maybe stretching them just a little bit. Hope that's helpful. Mm-hmm.
That's great advice, I think. I've got a question here for you. It's, at what point is it okay to stop correcting them when they read and don't? I was told that they need to read all the words.
Okay, to stop correcting them.
Yes.
All right. This is a really interesting question. Thank you for posing that question. And this does come down a little bit to what approach is being used at the school your child attends to learn to read. So if you're looking at a decodable approach, which is recommended for those early years of school, it's often said children should not be bringing home a reader that they can't read. They should only be bringing home readers that are controlled in a way that the words that appear in the reader have sounds in them that they are familiar with, and sounds that they can read out when they see the words written down. Now that's what a lot of schools, you will hear them talking about synthetic phonics or systematic phonics. And the concept is that they should only be bringing home readers that they are capable of reading. In reality, that doesn't always happen, because, as I said before, schools have a mixture of approaches to reading. So I think my feeling, and this would be something to particularly discuss with your child's teacher with regard to the type of readers they're bringing home, I think that certainly your confidence is going to be a little bit dented if you're stopped at every single word you make a mistake at. Having said that, though, I would like to hope that if they're needing correction on, you know, every word or every second word in that reader, then that's perhaps not the reader that they should be reading at that time. And again, I would encourage you to go back to your teacher for a more appropriate, I guess, book selection for the level that your child's reading at.
Thanks, Leanne. I'll just add on, I think I misread the question a little bit. So It was about reading do not as don't. So kind of abbreviating a word instead of reading out the full word.
Okay. I can't give you the definitive academic answer on that. My my feeling would be in your beginner readers, though, in those first couple of years, depends what your school's accepting, but I would usually get the children to read each word. It can be really helpful too, to get your child to point to each word as they read it, or you can point to it as they read it. When I'm reading stories to children that are not at school, and I'm running, say, library storytime sessions, I often point to the words when I'm reading them, not on all of the sentences, but on the title of the book and the author of the book, because I want you to think back that we never used to know that those squiggles, often written in black, were letters. We learned that. And we learned that letters have sounds that go with them. Initially, when children start becoming aware of books, it's interesting to ask them, can you show me a word? My friends, twins that are now in grade 2, who I started helping with their reading in the middle of prep, when I first started asking questions like, can you show me a word? They would point vaguely to where all the words were. And I'd say, but can you show me just one word? Can you show me a space between words? It's things that we take for granted, but when children are first being exposed to reading, those concepts are quite new. Yeah, so I would say, getting back to that, I would get them to read the do not, but I would have a conversation about the fact, I'm guaranteeing when probably not talking about a child in foundation with a question like this. I'm assuming your child is a little bit older, where they may be learning that there are constructions that you can simplify. And I guess that's a different level of skill and learning to begin with. Yeah.
So we also actually have a question about pointing. So it's a question saying that the child is in prep, she's reading a level 5-6 readers and enjoys reading, but often tries to read without pointing to words and consequently can lose her place. How do you best encourage pointing to words?
Okay. I'm not sure if your child is reading decodable words or predictive text, but either way, I think if your child is not comfortable pointing to the words themselves, if they don't mind you holding, like co-doing it with them. So you might be saying, how about we do it together? So you might just gently put your hand on their hand, and actually you can help adjust the speed that they're pointing to each word. There are some children though, and I know with some children who have a lot of sensory sensitivities, sometimes due to having autism, sometimes they're children that just have sensory sensitivities, they wouldn't want you to touch their hand and help guide them across to each word. So maybe perhaps you can just point to the word for them if they're not pointing to it. I guess one of the difficulties is children will often run ahead trying to read all the words when they've sort of skipped across quite a few words earlier on. I know, again, in helping my friends to prep children to read, they would often see a word, maybe it started with P, and they just make a quick wild guess at what it might be and just keep going. Because we've been using a decodable approach, I'll usually stop and pull them up and say, hold on a second, let's sound this word out. It might be pig, and go pig, and then we work out that that's the word it's meant to be. If we don't keep our finger on the word and we just keep going along, we would have had a word that wasn't actually in the context of what the story was about.
Okay, thank you. The next question, I guess, is a general question. How do you get your child interested in reading rather than just telling them to read?
Okay, I think this certainly has to start very early on, but I'll also talk about if you've if it didn't start very early on. For anybody who's got children that are babies, as well as having children learning to read, you can never start early enough reading to your child. You'll remember I said just reading to your child won't mean they'll be a good reader. Children have to learn how to read, but reading to your child does help develop an early interest in books. It helps develop their knowledge of different words, different vocabulary. It helps them understand about aspects of language and grammar. It also can help teach them prediction. If there's a particular story they like reading over and over again, then they get to understand about, you can start reading something and then predict what's going to happen next. If they don't know what's going to happen next, you can say, oh, I wonder what's going to happen on the next page, and have a chat about it. When they start getting a bit older and want to choose their own reading materials, I think that's good, as long as you can sort of limit it a little bit to books that are appropriate for them. Or, as I often find in the library, if I'm speaking to a parent, we might select a reader that we go, okay, this seems to be the level that's good for him or her to practice at. Oh, but he wants this one about Spider-Man. You've got to pick your battles. It's not worth saying, no, that's too hard. Take it, borrow that one too. And when you go home, maybe you read that one and they read their reader. Or they just pick out some words in the Spider-Man one that they can read, and you read the other words for them. It's most important that children develop an enjoyment of reading. And that's where, when you're selecting books to help them too with their reading, a lot of the new series that are coming out in readers, they're great. They have bright pictures, funny stories in them, and they're very engaging. They're a lot more interesting than some of the dry, older readers. And I think that's done on purpose, so that children are more ready and willing to engage in reading. For some children, it's really hard to find what they will read. And I guess I'm talking about older children here. I would say, parents will say, my son doesn't want to read anything. He'll only read comics. Do you know what? If he's reading comics, read comics. You want them to be interested in reading. Yes, they'll have to cross over to some of their readers and other books too. The other thing I do want to mention though too, if you have a child who's a struggling reader and they're building up a bit of a wall every time we say it's time to get out your reader, for some children, they hear that word reader and suddenly their anxiety increases. When your anxiety increases and you're worried about what you're about to do, you don't usually perform better. You usually perform worse. And that's the same for us as an adult. So some ways to get around that, I don't tend to call readers readers. I call them books, or I call them stories. Oh, let's see what this book is about. Let's see what this story is about. The other thing you can do is make up some little games. If your child for a period of time doesn't want to read the reader because they perceive that it's too difficult, you can take the words in the reader and make up a little memory game. Just get a piece of A4 paper, fold it again, and write the words, so that if you remember the game Memory or Pairs, where you turn the pieces of paper upside down and you turn two over at a time and try and find a match, take some of the words out of the readers and see if by taking the pressure off the reader but actually turning it a bit fun. Most children are pretty competitive, I've noticed, when it comes to playing games, and you can have some of the words that were in the reader, but because they're not in a reader and you're playing a game, it makes it a bit more fun. There are commercial games out there that you can purchase, but also too, you can make them up yourself. Draw a big racetrack on a piece of A3 paper and write some of the words that are in the reader on the racetrack. Put some fun things in, like, if you land on this space, jump ahead 3 spaces. If you land on this one, you landed in the monsters trap, go back to the start. Get a dice and play it as a dice game. It's still got words to read, but it's not in the reader, if that's what the problem seems to be. How are we going, Jenny?
I think that's actually all questions we have now. I don't know if anybody else wants to add a question. I will actually just make a comment from my own experience in a way. One of the motivations for putting this webinar is, while it is a few years since I've had children in prep and grade 1, I do remember that stage in my life where I had children regularly bringing home readers from school. And as a working parent, sometimes I personally felt a little bit of anxiety about that because I knew I needed to make time to help them with their reader in the night. So I'm very conscious, for a lot of parents, it can be a bit anxiety raising in itself. And I think the objective for parents is to put it out that there should be a little bit of a fun element from your perspective as well, in terms of assisting your child. So I really hope that tonight has been of benefit and you've learnt some practical tips that just ease a little bit of stress and anxiety for you in helping your child with their reading journey. So let me just check. It looks like there is one more question. I'll just open up.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Can I just say just quickly, just on what Jenny mentioned then too, when you are going through a reader, which I'd rather call a book or a story, don't just stick to the working out what the words say. Have a look at the pictures, talk about the pictures, have a little conversation. If the book's about a dog, talk about, if you've got a dog, does your dog do what the dog in the story is doing? And is it funny, or is the dog feeling sad? Or make a conversation about it too. So it's not just a test of their reading. It's actually a nice special time they're spending with you. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're almost on time, but I think this last question is a quick one.
Sure.
Can you please tell me the name of the book to learn sounds other than Milo's birthday surprise?
To learn sounds?
Yes.
Okay. You can learn sounds from any book that you like. I think I mentioned a little bit earlier that if you're looking at a picture storybook, what you might like to do is maybe just choose a particular letter that you see that might match something in the picture, so that you can talk about the fact, say there's a snake in the picture. There'll be somewhere on that page where the letter S appears, and you can talk about the fact that, oh, when we see that, that makes a S sound. Oh, that's what snake starts with. It's a S sound. I'm not a huge fan of alphabet books, because alphabet books will often have words in them where, say it's the letter C. On the letter C page, they'll have circus, where the letter C says S. They'll have a picture of a cat where the letter C says K. And that can be really confusing early on when children are learning to read. There aren't necessarily a huge range of books that you can go and say, oh, this book just deals with sounds. I guess Milo the Monkey is a little bit unique in that it was written particularly not to be an alphabet book. It was written to be a book that exposed children to words that are made with a similar sound. But lots of other picture story books, you can do, you can do I Spy with something like that. You can draw the letter for them if you like. If you go online and look up any of the series of readers that I mentioned a bit earlier that were on the slide, they have, most of them, heaps of things online if you want to use their strategies, and they'll have different characters that represent the different sounds. So yeah, you can use it with any picture storybook, but one like it where it's heavily weighted on each page with particular sounds. But as I said, you can use objects at home too. You don't have to actually stick to using a book. Get 3 different objects, and one might be a car, one might be a cup, and one's a book. And just play with your child, play a little game and see if they can work out which 2 should go together based on the first sound. Is it the car and the cup, or is it the car and the book? Even though book does have a "k" in it. Yeah, but you don't have to go out and borrow or specifically buy a specific book. But I did mention Milo the Monkey, particularly because it's a new resource that Brimbank Libraries have purchased recently. And yeah, it's a great one for sound identification, sound awareness.
Thank you, Leanne. So that's some really great practical information from you tonight. That's all we do have time for at this stage. I'd just like to finish off by saying, as Leanne emphasised earlier before, certainly talk to your teachers at school, have some conversations about how you as a parent can help your child. Library staff at Brimbank Libraries are very happy to help you if you need assistance finding any readers. And yeah, happy reading with your children. Thank you very much for joining us for this webinar. As mentioned before, I will send out the link to you. It'll be in coming weeks. It probably won't be in the next couple of days, but in coming weeks, I'll send you out the link to this recording. And I'll also include some resources for you to follow up some of the ones that Leanne has mentioned tonight. So thank you very much. So glad that you could join us, and I hope it's been really useful for you tonight. Thanks, Leanne.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.